Good. Well, welcome to this morning's Policy Exchange event on politics and social media. I'm Chris Yu, head of the digital government team at Policy Exchange, and I look after our research on technology, data, and the internet. And we've put this session together this morning just to spend a bit of time on how all of these new communications tools, starting with the web and email, but also Twitter, Facebook, and all the other social networks, how they are affecting the way that we communicate, what this means for politicians, for political parties, and for the rest of us. And really just to, I guess, explore a couple of questions today. How do we use social media to enhance public debate, re-engage citizens, re-engage people in the democratic process, and maybe spend a little bit of time on tips and lessons from people who do social media and digital communication well. Now we've got a super panel to discuss the issues this morning, so I'll introduce them quickly. We've got Robert Halfon, MP for Harlow. We have Alberto Nardelli, who is CEO and founder of Tweetminster. Elizabeth Linder, who is politics and government specialist at Facebook. And Shane Greer, who is executive editor at Total Politics. Now, just before I hand over to the panel, I will throw in a couple of prompts for us to think about. Maybe when I open up the questions later, you will have views on these. The first is really around. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. Sorry.
Okay.
Just saying hello to a member of the audience. That's all.
Okay. So, a couple of thoughts. One is just on. It's very easy to get caught up in all of the excitement and buzz around the new social media channels. And when I've had this conversation with people in the past, one thing that always comes up is actually the importance of getting the basics right. So, we talk about Twitter, we talk about Facebook, but actually, web and email are still out there and can be very, very important for a lot of people. And actually, one illustration of this is around MPs' websites. So I tend to think that I'm reasonably politically engaged and reasonably technologically literate. I confess up until this autumn I hadn't looked up my MP's website. I thought I probably should. I felt inspired by running this series of events, so I Googled my MP and travelled to his website. And it was all there. It was reasonably functional. There was some latest news. It wasn't the shiniest website ever, but it was fine. And I scrolled down to the bottom, and there was a big reminder that told me that, of course, there were no MPs because Parliament had been dissolved, and MPs will be back on the 6th of May 2010. Which, maybe not an ideal situation. I have emailed my MP, and I await to find out whether he updates his website. And the second prompt for thought later on is around this notion that some people have described as the filter bubble. So as we start to follow people on social networks and search engines start to return results that are personalised for us, in that world where everything that we see on the internet comes from people who share our perspectives and search engines start to predict our interests, how can we be sure that we're getting a proper, unbiased view of what's going on? And how can we be sure that actually we are seeing all of the views in a particular debate? So a couple of thoughts there on the basics and on this filter bubble effect. I'm sure that the panel will bring lots of other interesting perspectives to this conversation. I'll give them about 5 minutes to speak each, and then I'll open up the floor for questions and discussion with all of you. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Robert Halfon.
Thank you very much. I must say I'm very disappointed that Ian Dale's not here, because one of the reasons why I'm so into social media is because a few years ago I went to a talk in Westminster, and Ian Dale said, and I was a candidate then, not an MP, and Ian Dale said that anyone who didn't know who was a candidate and didn't have a blog should be ashamed of themselves. So I literally went back home and started doing my blog, which I've kept up to this day. And then what happened, of course, Ian Dale stopped doing his blog. But nevertheless, it's a great pleasure to be here, especially with Facebook, which we've had many discussions with, and with Tweetminster, and we have a sort of fellow love of watches. So not only do we love mobile tech, but we both collect watches as well. Now, I wanted to start by saying, imagine if you were going to Tesco's and you wanted to buy all kinds of different sauces, and the only sauce that Tesco sold was Tesco branded tomato ketchup. it is unlikely that you would go back to Tesco's. But that is what happens nowadays with too many people in politics regards to social media. I meet MPs frequently and people in politics who simply say things like, I don't like the internet, I don't use Twitter, and I don't use Facebook. And I almost find it quite shocking, because the fact is many of our constituents, thousands of them, are on Facebook and on Twitter, and they want us to use to communicate with us in this way. And if my constituent wants to communicate with me through Twitter rather than me putting a leaflet through his letterbox, which he then throws in the bin, what am I going to say to him? No, I don't communicate on Twitter, I don't like it. And so we have to be responsive. You know, the social media is very much a consumer-oriented phenomenon, as well as something that we get our message across. Now, the second thing that I want to say is that actually the people on the right have been, in my view, incredibly bad at this. Of course, we have Conservative Home, we had Ian Dale's blog, Guido Fawkes, all brilliant stuff, but that was still Web 2.0. In essence, they were information sites with a little bit of blogging and comments allowed. And of course, we all read Conservative Home, it's the best source of conservative news, but none of this is interactive. And the left for a long time were behind the right in terms of these sites. And then they woke up and they suddenly realised, actually, what we want to do is not Web 2.0, it's Web 3.0. And what they did was they created 38 Degrees. And yes, they will say we're not politically aligned and all this sort of thing, but most people would say it's a centre-left-ish campaign, although, you know, I accept that they are flexible on the things that they do. Now, that is the most, in my view, one of the most successful political campaigning things we've seen in current times, because they have had massive influence on government policy. Social media is changing the way we do lobbying. I mean, I know there are loads of lobbyists at conference having gin and tonics with ministers and whatever it may be, but the real way to change things, in my view, is through grassroots opinion and by using social media to do so. And the mistake that has been made by people on the right is that when we get emails from 38 Degrees, people on the right say, oh God, all these people are writing me, all left-wingers, so therefore I'm not going to bother to respond. And I almost want to cry when I hear that kind of comment, because actually the people, just because the organisation itself may be a sort of centre-left organisation, the people who join their various campaigns just care about the particular issues. And 38 Degrees is very clever at organising these issues around people's concerns. And everyone quotes Forrest, but they've done lots of stuff on NHS and other areas. Now, so when I get these emails, when I get 100 emails from 38 Degrees members, I don't say, oh goodness, they're all leftists. I say, fantastic. Because that means I have now 100 new emails that I can then use for my database and then write to these people about the issues that I know for sure that they are interested in. And so in a kind of crazy sort of way, whilst it means a lot of work for us, 38 Degrees are actually doing me a favour in our constituencies. But if you think, if you look at all the marginal seats, many of them which depend on just a few thousand votes, and if you think 38 Degrees has a few hundred members in many constituents up and down the country, during the general election, 38 Degrees is going to be incredibly powerful, because they've been so successful in creating that database, they are going to be able to influence the election result and put huge pressure on candidates in marginal seats. So what I did in order to try and counteract this is I set up an organisation called Right Angle. Now, of course, people have different meanings what they see as right angle, but of course 38 Degrees right angle, that was the main reason why I called it that. And but also people, of course, because it's right of centre rather than left of centre, and right rather than wrong. And what we have done is create it as a kind of powerhouse for campaigns. We've got, unlike 38 Degrees, we haven't got hundreds of thousands of pounds and loads of staff, and it's been a very limited budget, but we've created two campaigns. One, and we've also tried to be counterintuitive. So the first one was lower tax for lower earners, which had quite a bit of success and quite a bit of pickup. But the main campaign has been a sub-website called petrolpromise.com. Now this has been quite incredible because, again, we started it with a very small budget, and yet now we have thousands of emails from it. It's had loads of press coverage, particularly in the papers like The Sun and elsewhere. And MPs, when we've congratulated MPs for supporting lower petrol duty campaigns and the like, the MPs have come back to us saying thank you, because we've tried to make it very positive and describe MPs as heroes of the week and all this sort of thing, and they appreciate that, because sometimes you've got to be careful when you do social media. They're not always hectoring and condemning people. Now, 38 Degrees and Right Angle, I think, are going to be the future of social media in our country. We need, and they're not just the future of social media, but the future of political campaigning. And I would say that old lobbying is dying, and the new lobbying is going to have to use these things. And what we've done with Right Angle is that we have integrated the Twitter and Facebook on it, because we thought, why create a new database when actually you've got Facebook and Twitter already there? So when you log on to Right Angle, you go onto your Facebook, you go onto the Right Angle Facebook and Twitter pages, and so it makes everything interactive, and so we work with the grain of what is already there rather than just trying to remake and create something new. And just if you doubt what I'm saying, the Conservative Party created some kind of mini Facebook thing. I can't even remember the name of it. It's My Conservative, and it was not the most successful thing that ever happened. It cost a lot of money. Very few people went on it, and I think it's kind of died a death, because why do they need to create a brand new type Facebook when Facebook was already there, and they could have just got loads of Conservative activists to sign up to a brilliant interactive Facebook campaigning page. Now, just to conclude, I did have Twitter. I have sort of written 10 Twitter commandments, but it'll probably take too long to go through them. But the one thing I would say, despite social media being incredibly important, and this almost counteracts everything I have said, I kind of regard social media as online dating services. So it's no good just sitting behind the mouse looking for your date and then not actually going out to meet somebody. So in other words, human relationships are everything. So you can't just hide behind the computer, and you have to use social media as a way of reaching out to people and a way of meeting people as well, because social media is not a substitute for interaction. It complements one another. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert, thank you very much. And maybe we'll get on to some of the 10 Commandments later on. Shane, I'll hand over to you next.
Hi. So as Chris mentioned, I'm the executive editor of Total Politics, but one of my other roles in life, I'm the publisher of our American and Latin American magazines, which are all focused on political campaigning. So campaigns and elections in the US, which started in the 1980s, kind of like the industry title for political campaigning. I bring that up because 38 Degrees, Right Angle, actually, if you look, we always hear about this idea that what happens in the States is kind of several years ahead of political campaigning in the UK. I don't actually buy that. I think a lot of the differences are down to regulatory differences in each country, but you can see things like MoveOn.org, where the idea for this kind of mass movement, whereby you're kind of crowdsourcing support and then driving people toward a political objective, has already happened, and we now see it here with 38 Degrees and with Right Angles. I bring up the US because when we discuss issues like social media, certainly in the UK, one thing I find is that we tend to overemphasize it. And Robert actually touched on exactly this point, that you have to get out there and interact. It's not just enough to have a Twitter profile, a Facebook page, and so on. There's all the other stuff you usually do. There's the leafleting, there's the party election broadcasts, there's all the traditional elements of political campaigning engagement that remain fundamentally important. And social media essentially supports that. Our fastest growing client segment in the US business is digital campaign firms who offer services like digital fundraising, social media strategy, website development, everything you could possibly want, things digital. The one thing that we find that they all emphasize is that they are just one tool in a box of many, many, many tools. We see that applied, for example, with everyone knows in the US about the level of paid for television advertising. What we see increasingly is that those ad spots are taken, repurposed for a YouTube environment. Perhaps they're shorter. They have a call to action on the end of them, so you start to data capture, which is built into perhaps Facebook or Twitter, or certainly the in-house list maintained by each campaign. So you've got a much broader campaign that builds in those key things like Twitter, like Facebook, and indeed any of the other. Email, I should say, is a silent killer. We forget about email. Email seems so old hat. You know, we've been sending email since the 1990s. Email, I would say, is still the backbone. Robert kind of touched on it a little bit with his list development. It's still the backbone of digital campaigning for most campaigns. It's a way to get directly into someone's inbox and to say something to them. So I just want to emphasize that point about it. It's one of many tools. We talked about this bubble. Chris touched on the bubble idea, and I'll highlight that with a personal story, somewhat shameful. A couple of years ago, there was a fire, I think everyone may remember, in Camden Markets in London, quite a big one. I completely missed that. It was about a week and a half before I'd heard that it happened. Why? Because at that time, the sort of filters I was using to aggregate news via Twitter and otherwise were so political focused that I completely missed a story like that. A sort of a wake-up call that made me change the way the filters work, so I now get a much broader range of news. But you have to be very careful about not allowing yourself to get into a bubble as a politician or anyone else. And again, it comes back to the engagement point. The final thing I think is worth touching on is when we talk about social media, so much of it is focused on the broadcast element. You know, pushing out our email, tweeting, being on Facebook, setting up events and whatnot. One of the key things I'd suggest to everyone to consider as well is monitoring. Twitter is phenomenally important. To me professionally, as a politician, all the more important, I would imagine. But actually the most important bit for me isn't necessarily the broadcast, or indeed even the engagement that comes out of broadcast. If I tweet something from this event and somebody says, "You're an idiot, you're wrong," and I go, "Oh, no, I'm not," we get into a fight. It's not that. It's actually the monitoring element. So when you go onto my Hootsuite deck on the second monitor on my desk in the office, there's a bunch of filters for Total Politics, @TotalPolitics, my name, names of key people in the organization, names of other titles, so I can quickly scan through and see if someone has referred to, for example, Total Politics without using the hashtag, something that I might otherwise miss. Robert could have Robert Halfon, and he sees that. What might happen? Well, perhaps a constituent isn't happy about something, and they're annoyed at Robert. I'm sure that doesn't happen, but they might be. With that filter, he's able to see it immediately and then engage with them. And I mean, how many of us have been in one of those situations where you've had bad service at a restaurant or something like that, and the thing that actually annoys you most isn't so much what went wrong, but that there wasn't an apology, that the problem wasn't acknowledged, that someone didn't say, "Listen, we messed up, I'm sorry for that." The engagement thing is key, because when you can see that someone is upset or there's an issue that's important in a given area, you're able as a politician or anyone who's politically active to jump on that. I go, okay, I need to be involved here and engage with that person directly. So to take again an example from my sort of professional life, one of the things I see is quite often, say someone is going to buy a copy of Total Politics and I can't find it, or they're choosing between magazines. The number of times this gets tweeted, should I get Total Politics and, I won't mention, but X, Y, or Z? And I'm able to go and go, well, I would really suggest Total Politics, and by the way, would you like a 3-month trial subscription? It takes me no time at all, but the goodwill that's engendered as a result is incredible. Now translate that to a political environment where you've got a constituent who is upset about something, concerned about something, not necessarily upset at the MP, but upset about some particular issue, and you as the MP are able to go, or prospective parliamentary candidate are able to go, I hear you, here's what I would propose to do about that, or here's what I will do about that. Incredibly powerful. It's the ability to reach out and get involved in conversations and interactions that a couple of years ago you would not have been aware of, because that person would have been privately upset. They might have said to their friend or a co-worker, "Isn't it disgraceful that X, Y, or Z is happening?" Now, they're on social media, they're tweeting about it, and you have an opportunity to reach right in there, hear that, and respond to it. That's where social media is key for politicians, I think. Thank you.
Elizabeth from Facebook.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to see some old friends again and meet some new ones today. I wonder if some of the people in the room here have read Ian McGilchrist's book called The Master and His Emissary. Fascinating read, rather a long one, but absolutely fascinating. And the theory in the book takes a look at the right brain and the left brain and its impact on society, tracing civilizations from the Athenians through to the Renaissance through to today. And as many of us know, it's our right brain that helps with the context of things, the creativity, ideas. And it is the left brain that thinks about structure and rules and regulations. And the theory that McGilchrist, who studied neuroscience and is a psychiatrist, brings forward in this book is that today's era is one where we are seeing a massive unbalance in these sides of our brains. We've become incredibly focused on rules and regulations, and we've lost a little bit in our creative side, in our broader humanistic curiosity in what life and civilization is. And if any of us think about the end of our working day, if you have a lot of work to do and at 7 p.m. you're going to forego the theater to get the work done, this would have been an unheard of decision. In the Renaissance, both were seen as equal. Whatever you did after your technical work was not in any way lesser to what you were doing during the day. The read is actually so interesting, but why I bring it up in the context of social media and begin this conversation with the Renaissance in the brain is because it's actually my hope that social media will help us to bring back into balance this incredible imbalance that we're seeing. Because it's impossible to be too focused on the strict rules and structure if people are actually demanding for us to listen to them and asking to have a voice. There are so many times when I'll meet with politicians or government officials across the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, and I'll realize that they're stuck for ideas for what to do on their Facebook page. And they'll ask me, well, how should I make it more interesting? And I'll say, well, how many people do you have connected to your page? Maybe it's only 30, maybe it's a couple hundred, but those are 30 or a couple hundred people who could all have great ideas for what they want to hear from you about. Ask them. Ask the people who are connected to you, what is it that you want to hear from me? How can I be of service or of use to you on my page? And it's that collective creativity that helps us to fuel what it is that people are demanding for or looking for. And I think will help us to actually broaden out and tap into all of the ideas that come from people everywhere. For anybody who reads the occasional letter to the editor, in a newspaper you realize the editorial staff has a fascinating point of view, but so do all of those people, those incredibly qualified people who are writing in the letters to the editors. There are some wonderful points that have been raised already by Shane and Robert, which I'm thrilled to hear, especially because we do have a bit of a history of connecting and communicating on this, and there's some wonderful things going on within this party to really drive forward this space. But I think a couple of the most important, again, I spend most of my time doing strategy sessions and workshops with politicians and government officials across a massive region. Some are democracies, some are not. But overall, I think the most important thing to remember is this really is about engagement. Whenever we do social media talks, we sometimes get so obsessed with numbers. You can see, Facebook was an example of this just last week, the 1 billion user announcement, which the press absolutely loves, and that's great, and it's good for our company. But actually the point is that, how engaged are these people? This is what we care about most. Because you could have, 500 people connected to your page, but if they're all from Indonesia and they don't vote in this country, then that's not really going to help raise awareness about your cause, to get elected the next round, or to drive forward your mission. So really thinking about, it's not just the number of likes anywhere, but it's really the number of thoughtful and interesting and engaging comments that people are leaving across any platform, but of course especially Facebook, because this is the company that I represent. That is something that's so important to remember. Another key component is so much of the social media world is driven by everything being public. But let's also remember that, you know, not everybody is comfortable in a public setting. Not everybody's talking about their politics in a public setting. I know how this is coming from the Silicon Valley. In California, there are certain issues that you know 99.9% of your colleagues are going to vote for that maybe you don't agree with, and you're not going to want to use Facebook to talk about that. There are such things as, for example, private messages on a Facebook page. Absolutely crucial to remember that this exists, so that, you know, as was pointed out earlier, you can encourage people to contact you either through public commentary, which inspire public debate, or through more personal mechanisms, through, you know, whether it's an email or a Facebook message. Great way to create focus groups as well. Finally, this idea of connecting the offline and the online strategy. You know, it's so easy in this world to think of something as being, this is what we're going to do for people online. This is what they like to do. But those people are also the people who are seeing your campaign posters or who are reading your messages in the newspaper. So really bringing that approach together, and most crucially, giving people an opportunity to actually meet you. Some of you might have seen that some politicians are using their own initials when they update their Facebook page or their Twitter account. And then if their staff is doing it, their staff will use their own initials. This is brilliant. This is what it's all about. Everybody knows that if you're a busy member of parliament, you're not always necessarily going to be, the one who's going to be responding to all of those messages. But, you know, maybe between the combination of yourself and your staff, you can still get across the real identity of that. So just a couple of things to kickstart the conversation, but I'm really looking forward to having an opportunity to hear your questions and get the debate going, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And Alberto from Tweetminster.
So, I want to talk briefly about how Twitter and political communications have changed over the past couple of years. A few weeks ago I was asked to write an article about the differences between the election campaign here and the campaign in the US, and how Twitter was being used in the two campaigns. And one thing I found is that from a product perspective, there actually hadn't been that much innovation. So you had, here we had maps showing where the parties were campaigning, we had trending topics within politics and lists of which politicians were the most active or the most mentioned. And if you look at the campaign now in the US from a product perspective, it's actually quite similar. So not much has happened from that point of view over the past couple of years. The one thing though, which I think is the biggest innovation in terms of Twitter and politics, is the fact that Twitter is now mainstream. So when the election was held here, there were about just over 1 million people using Twitter in the UK. There's now over 10 million people. And if you look at the politicians, when we launched Tweetminster in December of 2008, there were 4 MPs on Twitter. Just before the election, there were 100. The day after the election, there were 200. And now there are over 370 MPs. And it's not just politicians, it's journalists too. I remember speaking to lots of journalists about Twitter in early 2009, and the majority saying, what's the point? People don't want to know what I have had for breakfast or had for lunch. So I think the two key points there is one of size. 10 million people is a very large number, and the second is also a change in terms of attitudes. So it's just now part of political conversations. It's no longer questions if it's useful or not useful, it's just there and it's something that needs to be used and dealt with. And I think there's various trends which have emerged over the past couple of years. The first, I think Shane on the line, which is fundamental, is news monitoring. The way people monitor news. So many people, the first thing they look at in the morning is their Twitter feed and see what's happening, what's the news. And that's not just important from a point of view of how we consume and discover news, it's also important in terms of shaping public opinion and the way people perceive news. Because if I'm getting my news from my Twitter stream, the links that I will click on will depend on what's being shared. The opinions that people will have on myself as a politician or as a party will depend on the articles that they're reading about those issues. So there's very practical implications in terms of how news is being consumed through social media. The second, which I think is actually the most powerful characteristic of social media, is amplification. So social media amplifies things. If a story is big, it becomes even bigger on social media. If someone is a nice person, that shines through and many more people discover that they're a nice person. If they're less nice, eventually people will discover that person is less nice. And the speed at which things are amplified. So to give you an example, when we post something on Twitter as Tweetminster, 90% of activity happens in less than 5 minutes. So that can be hundreds of people retweeting something or sharing something in less than 5 minutes. And again, that has very practical implications, because if you need to deal with a crisis, or if you need to put out a statement about a certain issue, the time that you have to influence public opinion is narrow. It's very small. So the way we do things fundamentally changes because of the speed at which things happen on social media. A very good example of that is trending topics. Something trends, everyone's talking about it, but one of the hardest things is to understand if that thing is actually important, because in 5 minutes it may be gone and something else may be trending. And I think that shows a very important connection in terms of on and offline, where fundamentally it's judgment that matters. It's judgment in understanding if that issue is actually important and if someone should intervene around that issue, or if you shouldn't intervene and just let it trend, and in 5 minutes people will be talking about something else. Another element I think is characteristic of social media, which we've seen emerge over the past couple of years, is the way influence has changed. And I think it's changed from at least 2 points of view. The first is it's created a level playing field. And that doesn't necessarily mean from a democratic point of view where there are no more influencers. What it fundamentally means is that anyone can emerge as an influencer. It's much easier to discover influencers. And we see this a lot with elections. So we work with the BBC to monitor elections in various countries around the world. And one thing that you have on Twitter and Facebook, which previously you couldn't have, is actually seeing or following in first person the experiences of people who are on the ground during an election. Previously, the only news that we had about an election was from a journalist who was there and we read their reports. Now we can see people who are actually voting. A couple of weeks ago in Georgia, there were people who started posting pictures and videos of police raiding a polling booth, and these images and videos be shared on Twitter and Facebook. So you're much closer to events and experiences. And influence also in terms of how you connect with influential individuals and organizations, such as politicians and media organizations, who are very much influenced by what's happening on social media in terms of sourcing news, in terms of sourcing facts, or connecting with people to bring onto programs, or getting sound bites and quotes to use within their coverage. The final characteristic, I think, which is very important, and which will have very profound implications in terms of politics, is the notion of memory and history. So we do things on Facebook or on Twitter. We say something, or someone posts a video about maybe an event, and many years from now that individual may be standing for office, and someone says something, and someone says, yeah, but you know, 5 years ago, you said something completely different. Remember this tweet that you posted 6 years ago? Remember this image, this photo that you shared on Facebook? And I think that will have very profound implications in terms of creating a memory around an individual's identity and the way their thoughts and positions evolves over time, and we'll see uses of that a lot more in political campaigns in the years to come. Two areas where I think social media still has to develop a lot, Twitter especially, I think Facebook less, is one in terms of organization, so the way social media and Twitter in particular is used around organizing people, and that connection between the people that you connect with online and offline. And finally, I think it's how you use all the value that you generate online with the people that you connect with around dealing with trends, emerging trends, and how you interact with all those elements, how you bring those back into the offline campaign. And I think one of the biggest challenges is very much linked. So, for example, the Prime Minister joined Twitter over the weekend. I think one of the biggest challenges is finding that right balance between being interesting and saying and sharing your opinion about things, and finding the balance between that and the seriousness and the role and the office that you're holding. Because the majority of here we have an exception, but the majority of politicians are very boring on Twitter. They always meet people who are very excited to meet them, and they always have incredible days on the doorstep. And fundamentally, for most people, that's boring. And you have on the opposite extreme, you have how many people follow Rupert Murdoch on Twitter? So I personally think Rupert Murdoch is the most interesting senior figure on Twitter. I've discovered more about his position on things since he joined Twitter than before. He expresses his views about everything in a very candid manner. Now, most politicians, especially senior politicians, can't do that. So it's about finding that right balance between incredibly boring and incredibly interesting. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges in terms of making most use of social media. Thank you very much.
Just a quick word.
I just had to comment on what you just said about politicians and boring tweets. Now, the problem is this. If you're an MP and the whole idea of using Twitter and Facebook is to get your message out there to your constituents, and when they retweet your messages, it's incredibly effective because it becomes a de facto endorsement of what you are doing. And so I'm in a bind in that I like to tweet some interesting things, which I hope are interesting, but I also have to tweet that I'm meeting, because that's what my local residents are concerned about. Now, you and I say this very politely, there is a kind of Westminster Village tweet snobs, as I call them, and they think anything that you put parochial is incredibly boring because it's not some exciting, sexy insider stuff about who's up and who's down in the reshuffle or whatever it may be. But the reality is, for me, the most important use of social media is to engage with my constituents, and so I have to put that stuff on, and that's the reason why you see so many of the other MPs doing this.
Okay. So, crikey, lots of food for thought, and in the spirit of a event on communications, I think we will open this up to the floor. So what I'll do is I'll take maybe 3 questions at a time and then give some people on the panel a chance to respond. And we'll start on my left, so the lady in green.
Thanks. Hi, my name's Rowena Davis. I'm a counsellor in Peckham. And I would be really interested to know, we've heard a lot about what people think are the positive sides of Twitter and social media, but what I want to know is what people think the costs are. So Alberto touched on that a bit, but I'd really like to know what other people think. Just specifically, my concern, and I can't believe no one's mentioned it yet, is the socio-economic demographic of the users of Twitter in comparison to other media forms. Now, I don't know about your constituents, Robert, but in Peckham, yeah, no one uses Twitter. No one at all. They use Facebook, yeah, but actually in Peckham, and especially we saw this around the riots, most of the people in my community were using BlackBerry Messenger because it's cheap and accessible through phones. The next more inclusive is Facebook, and the very, very least is Twitter. And there's some really interesting research quoted by the Guardian data journalist James Ball, which shows that I think it's 1 in 4 people on Twitter have a salary of over 50 grand a year.
Okay.
Yeah. So just on that point, and my feeling is that if I feel that the concern about Twitter is that it is ultimately elites talking to elites, and when I use it, I'm very clear that that's who I'm talking to.
Okay, thank you. So hold that thought, and then let's take a couple more. So the gentleman at the back. Yeah.
Thomas Alexander, Democracy Matters. We're a network of promoting people engaging with democracy. And I'm glad the previous questioner raised this point about lots of people are disengaged. I mean, one of the big issues, people are completely disengaged, or many people. And would like to, your tips about how we can re-engage people to see that politics is relevant to their lives using social media. Particularly, for example, we've got Parliament Week coming up on the 19th of November. So any tips on using social media, particularly for people who are disengaged?
Okay, and let's take one more. So the gentleman in But
Yeah, I'm Luke Bozier, blogger and tech entrepreneur partner. Twitter, I've spoken a bit recently on panels and online about what happens if you don't want to be on Twitter. It's a bit of a bandwagon. Sometimes you feel like you have to. For politicians or aspiring politicians, can you succeed in the 2010s and the 2020s without engaging in social media? And basically, in short, can you go from candidate to cabinet without using Twitter?
Okay, so the question about what are the costs of social media and the demographics of the people who are listening. A question about can we find some tips to actually re-engage people using social media, and can you make it if you're not on Twitter in 2012 and beyond. So, Rob, would you like to take it first?
Sure. First on your first point, on the reputation, the problem side of it, you are incredibly right. I mean, one day I was sitting on the back benches and I had loads of, I looked at my BlackBerry and I had loads of tweet messages suggesting that I believed that Madeleine McCann had murdered her daughter, and I was shocked, and my face went white. My colleague said to me, "What's the matter?" Because it was like horrific, just loads of, because somebody had put something on there which was completely untrue, and I had to rebut every single tweet, and then write to the McCann straight away to say that this was what was happening. And so it is very, in that sense, it can be very frightening and very, very dangerous. So there is a downside to it, but I still believe the benefits outweigh the bad. The other thing, of course, is what I call, one of my commandments is the Othello principle of Twitter, in that reputation is everything. So if you don't do tweets when you're drunk, when you're tired, whatever it may be, because the damage, as we've seen in recent times, without mentioning any names, can be just enormous. Your point is very, very important about the kind of people who use Twitter. Now, I don't know how well you know Harlow, but Harlow is not, the average wage is 21,000. We have some of the most deprived wards in the east of England. And I would say a year ago that you were right, and that the majority of people were on Facebook, but less were few on Twitter, very much so. But that has absolutely changed in the last year, and I meet people from all walks of life, and I go everywhere. And the reason for it is BlackBerry, because BlackBerries can be got for very little money now, £12 a month or whatever, and because they can put Twitter on the BlackBerry, they can tweet, and that has made a huge difference to the number of people who are buying very cheap BlackBerries and on very small contracts or pay-as-you-go or whatever it may be, and they get 100 megs of data, again, very small amounts of money. And so I think that the Twitter profile is not everywhere. I can't speak for your area, but I think it is changing. On the, I'll leave others to do the engagement in Parliament one, because can you just remind me of the third question? So I did write it down.
Can you make it as an MP without Twitter?
Well, I personally, I think if you don't use social media as an MP in the modern age, in the age that we live in, I think you can't make it in this day and age. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, I might ask you about this point around tips for engaging people online.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really great questions. So I'll start there. I think one of the most important things you can do is give people a reason to engage with you online. If you want to, and if this works well for you, give them a reason to come back to your page. Whenever you do an event, no matter how small or how remote, make sure that you let people know at least a day in advance, on Facebook or whichever online services you're using, and take a question from them. Say that we'll have time to take just one question from someone from Facebook. Make sure then that you bring that back to your page, tag them in the comments, like their comments, tell them, thanks so much, Shane, for your question. Here was the response delivered yesterday. And then if Shane actually missed the online TV event, he's going to see on Facebook that somebody actually took into account what he did. Fascinating case study from the US Embassy in Tel Aviv. They decided to live stream the barbecue for the 4th of July, which is basically just a bunch of expatriate Americans eating hamburgers and talking to the ambassador. It's kind of fun, but I don't know that it would compete with even national news, which is at least interesting. And 8,000 Israelis tuned in to watch this crazy barbecue. You know, that to me, I was sitting there listening to this and I was thinking, wow. But let's think about what that means. You know, the 4th of July barbecue in Israel is a behind closed doors event. You can only get in if you have a ticket. So if you're not one of the people who's involved, you know, in the U.S. relations or whatever, you're curious. You know, what does the event look like? That's kind of cool. Think about why it is that we will go to an opera house and rather than see the opera, we'll do the behind-the-scenes costume tour with dusty, old, gross, disgusting-looking costumes. Well, the reason is because that sometimes is more interesting than actually seeing the perfect show from way back in row Z. So I think that there's a few things that you can actually do to, as you said, engage people, kind of, you know, to lure them back into the political debate. The sheen isn't necessarily as much fun as a little bit of what goes on in your real everyday lives. And then just to quickly take on, you know, the questions about some of the pitfalls of this. I think one of the things that I see on political Facebook pages is the tendency to overpromise and underdeliver. And this can cause an expectations gap. And if you're having a bunch of people on your page, you know, ask for something, which is completely outside of what a member of parliament can do, or completely outside of your control, then rather than just let that go and think, well, the people will figure it out later, you know, take it head on. Let people know that you really appreciate their feedback, but that, you know, there's, you know, this is how this particular law works. There's nothing I can do. Maybe try going here or there. You know, help guide people to where they actually can go so you don't have this massive expectations gap, which, you know, the National Intelligence Council and a bunch of other reports are coming out talking about. And then, you know, just finally, you know, people will drive the medium. We're here sitting to talk about, you know, a social media panel because that's what we're focusing on today. But absolutely don't forget any other medium. And by all means, don't hold fast to something just because the Facebook girl told you it was important in 2012. By 2015, you know, hopefully Facebook and Twitter will still be doing well. This is our world, we love it. But we don't know. People can be fickle. People will think of something new. So make sure that you're actually where the people are. I was actually at an event in Montenegro a few weeks ago, and the representative from Moldova said, you know, we get a lot of criticism from outsiders saying, why is Moldova so interested in open government strategies online when we're one of the poorest countries in the world and none of our citizens are connected on Facebook and Twitter? And she said, but the reason is because every village in Moldova has at least one computer, and everybody will go during the day and gather around that computer to check the government's Facebook page. It's massively successful and popular. But then everybody from the outside looks at that and says, what is Moldova doing? They're barking up the wrong tree. So really know your audience. Are they doing that? If not, then absolutely don't do it. Wait for when the time is right and just watch and keep your pulse on what's happening.
Okay. I'm going to take a few more questions from the floor and then I'll bring the other members of our panel in. So the gentleman at the front.
Hello, my name's Ed Hammond. I work for a charity called the Centre for Public Scrutiny. I just wanted to pick up on some of the points that the panel were making around the use of Twitter and other social media as a means of engagement rather than just as a means of broadcast. Just thinking about what politicians can do to influence public institutions, councils, government departments, other public agencies who seem to principally want to use Twitter as a means of broadcast rather than as a way to properly engage with citizens, and talking about that in the wider context of its use for accountability.
Okay, and the gentleman with glasses.
Yeah, my name's Keith, I'm an accountant, former councillor now. The people predominantly using social media are young, but they're the people least likely to vote. So what studies have you seen that that suggest that actually, however much you use social media, you are actually voting? And also when I've tried to get people on the doorstep to accept me on Facebook, there's been a look back at horror because they feel I'm about to enter their private world and violate it with my grubby politics. How do you actually, as a politician on the doorstep, overcome that fear? And what devices are there in Facebook that actually allow you to offer them the barriers to that?
Okay, and one more.
My name's Nick and I help run this website called Platform 10. I just wanted to bring up YouTube because I think the biggest revolution will be when TVs and computers properly merge. Then what will happen is the main source of information will basically be what we're talking about here today, plus it'll be beyond regulation, plus it'll show people how, as you're talking about Twitter and other things, can go into this and help the viewer experience. Now, I'm sort of just wondering, when do you think that'll happen?
Okay, so 3 more excellent questions. One on how can we use social media to influence public institutions? A question around the age demographic of people using social media, and can we get more young people to vote? That's a question on what does it feel like on the doorstep and how can we overcome it? And this forward-looking point around YouTube and video more broadly. So Alberto, maybe you first.
So I think, so first of all, I think there's a point which runs across almost all of those questions, and in some way to the previous questions too. I think the dichotomy between on and offline media is a false one, and it's also not wrong, but easily confusing to always compare Facebook and Twitter and YouTube as if they were all the same thing, this social media basket. It's a bit like if you're trying to target a certain group, having something in the Guardian or in the Daily Mail is fundamentally different because you'll be reaching different groups. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is, in terms of engagement and in terms of reaching out to people, social media and specific tools, some will be better than others for different things, have to be part of the things that you use. Specifically on engagement, I think it depends what we mean by engagement. I think lots of people criticize, for example, high-profile politicians for not, they say, oh, they don't engage. Well, if by engagement you mean replying to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of messages of abuse, it will be very, very hard for them to engage. I think if you start describing engagement as having a general understanding of what the concerns that people are expressing on social media and then communicating those concerns either directly on social media or through other platforms, or having specific windows for engagement. So Angela Merkel has something very interesting in Germany using YouTube, where once a month she takes questions and then she does a video where she addresses the trends within those concerns. So there's various ways around how do you engage versus, because you can't reply to everyone. On the YouTube question, I think it's kind of already happening. So if you look at bits of specific content on YouTube, some videos will have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of views, and for one small bit of content that is already very, very large. I think if you measure it properly in terms of comparing it with television, it's already there or getting there.
Yeah. Shane.
I think I'll just touch on the demographics point first of all, because there is an assumption, and I know that you'd be able to speak much better to this than even I would, that it is all young people. And actually, it just isn't the case, which I found very starkly when my mother-in-law started messaging me on Facebook. I can't project this, but these are the 2012 statistics which come from Google's ad clicks. So again, they have to be reliable because you're serving very sophisticated commercial clients. But if you look at Facebook, for example, to pick the big one, actually the over 45s account for almost just under 50% of the audience there. The over 35s bring it to almost 70%. And you may have some nuance on that. Twitter, to pick the other big one again. Over 35s, about 60% of the audience. So actually, it isn't just a young people thing. But even if it were, let's pretend for a moment that it were. That it was 99% people who were sort of 18 to 25 or something like that. Yes, they might not vote. I mean, the statistics certainly support that. Interesting one in the U.S. election. Everyone talked about 2008 being the year that the youth turned out to vote. And Obama drove this huge turnout. Yes, the youth turnout was up, but actually total youth turnout was lower than when the franchise was extended to 18-year-olds many years previously. But if it were the case that it was only young people that were using these social media channels, I would actually argue that there's still an incredibly strong case for engaging, because young people, I mean, I don't know, hands up here who's a party member and who rely a lot on young people and otherwise to hand out leaflets and go door to door. It's about activists. You're engaging with young people, getting them involved and getting them to turn out. And this comes back to the point that it isn't just social media. There's all the traditional elements of campaigning as well. You get those people out, you hand them a stack of leaflets and you send them door to door. It's incredibly powerful for that. So even if it were the case, which it isn't, that it is primarily a young people's medium, I would say that there's still a very strong case to do that. I want to touch very briefly on one of the questions from the beginning, which was about this, the whole thing that everything you do is now online and things that might in later years embarrass you. This is a story from the Conservative Party conference on 2009 or 2010. I can't remember which one, but we covered it in Total Politics in the then campaign section about what not to do on social media. A bunch of young conservatives, obviously drinking, obviously back in the apartment or hotel room or wherever it was they were staying, still a lot of liquor on the go, still wearing their lanyards and passes. And one of them, a guy, was wearing one of those aprons that's got sort of the rippling muscles on it. And suffice to say that this apron was anatomically correct, and that the other young conservatives were engaging with this apron whilst consuming alcohol. And someone took a picture of it. Took several pictures, actually, and put it up on Facebook. Very, very silly. Loads of people saw that. We saw it, and we ran a story about it. We didn't publish it because that would have been crass, but we did make the point that you have to remember that when you are engaging in life today, people will be there with a camera and a phone. And whether it's in a private setting in your home and you're having a dinner party or a barbecue, in a sense you have to start setting ground rules. Is this a private event where it's Chatham House rules? And you're running your own party? You wouldn't have done that years before. People arrive as guests, you go, by the way, this barbecue is Chatham House rules. You could just leave your phones at the door. But actually you have to think about that now. So that's really what I would make about that. But yeah.
Okay. We are close to time, so I'm going to take maybe a couple more points on the floor, because I know a lot of people wanted to mention something, and then I'll give the panel a final word on the spot. So, any last questions, gentlemen?
Rob McIver from London First, which is a campaign group. Actually curious enough about to relaunch its website and offering people the opportunity for the first time to comment on our policies and our positions. And I'd be quite interested in any advice you can give for dealing with trolls, because it does strike me, when I look on almost every politician's website, any campaign website, it doesn't take very long before the sensible discussion descends into abuse and chaos. And I suppose the question is, do you ignore them completely? Do you feed them a little bit? I'd just be interested.
Okay, so we'll take that as the last question. So maybe Elizabeth and then Robert, you can have the final word.
Oh, perfect. I get to start with the trolls. So yeah, absolutely. One of the things, and I don't know how you've set this up, but when you do use something like the Facebook comments plugin, so that when people comment, it posts, Elizabeth commented on, this article. The advantage of that is that any kind of comments that are legit, troll-like or spam-like, will already be caught by Facebook and won't appear at all. It was actually quite funny when we first launched this, because a couple of, I think it was TechCrunch, but one of the tech news sites said we're kind of missing the trolls and the spam because we got so used to it. But that's one advantage. The other thing you can do, and this applies to an individual Facebook page, which gets to the gentleman's question as well, is when you set up a Facebook page, people are not you're not friending them, people are actively finding you, so you get away from feeling like you're diving into their business. But you can set up a profanity blacklist, so you can kind of choose words, especially if you're dealing with certain types of issues where you're going to get some commentary that you're not comfortable with. You can create a blacklist. You can obviously, I would say, on spam-like content that you feel Facebook has not caught, you can report that to us as spam. The spammer is not going to know that you specifically reported them. They're just going to, we're just going to be able to flag them and take a look at what their behavior is and give them a warning. So there's all kinds of little tricks that you can use to get around that.
Okay. And Robert?
Yeah, can I comment on the question?
Yeah, please do.
First of all, on trolls, that is again the downside of Twitter. And I often wake up in the morning, and because I'm a compulsive BlackBerry addict, I always look at my BlackBerry, my tweet account non-stop, and you get your WXX or Utori FX, whatever it may be, and you just sort of kind of get used to it after a while. And but also, you kind of what I've got to do, if people engage with me politically, and even if they disagree with me, I keep them on. But if they're just nasty and abusive, then I just block them. I've learned, you know, I work on the Dane Geld principle that if you give nasty people a little, they come back for more and more and more. And so the Dane Geld principle is quite important. The chap over there was saying, oh, he knocks on the door and says to people, well, you know, can I join your Facebook account? No, and I'm not surprised they get upset because that is not the way to do it, and I mean that in a very polite way. Because I'm really grateful to Elizabeth for this because I had a huge problem. I had 5,000 odd people on my Facebook. I didn't know who half of them were. I was getting loads of weird messages and freaky stuff and everything. And Elizabeth taught me and helped me enormously to create a Facebook campaigning page where people post stuff off, and it's made a huge difference to my life. But what I do is whenever I go, my business card, the address, my Council Commons address is in tiny little writing on the right hand side because no one gives a monkeys really nowadays where that is. But my blog, my Twitter and my Facebook account are written in big letters in the middle because that's, and what you do is you just hand them the card and say, I've got a Facebook page, if you want to like me, please join. No pressure, and not everybody does, but some people do. On the YouTube issue, YouTube hasn't yet reached, you were talking about 5-minute news. There's actually, we've gone from 24-hour news to 24-second news, because that's what it is. But the problem with YouTube and videos, and the reason why I'm not very good at it, is because it takes too long. Even if I take a video on my BlackBerry or a Blogger, but video machine, by the time you've uploaded it, I've wasted half an hour. I just can't faff around. When the technology gets better and we get 4G, that will change YouTube and things like that enormously. Final point is online engagement. Well, this is great. This is why social media is so good. You can do a petition online. I did something about antisocial behaviour in a particular area in my constituency only a couple of weeks ago. Within a day, I had 750 local people sign up that petition with their email, with their data. And then we then use that to lobby the local council. So that's how you engage with local councils and whatever it may be.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to wrap this up here just to say thanks to everyone on the panel. Thank you to our friends at Yatterbox who produced the infographic, which you may have picked up on the way in, and if you didn't, there's some on the table on the way out. And thank all of you for coming. If you want to know what happened at this event in 10 years' time, then look it up on our YouTube page and you can see what people said. Thank you.